I feel very scatterbrained right now. Hey, it's Sue in the restricted section. I know I said in one of my past videos that I probably wasn't going to do a wrap-up this month, but then I ended up reading 2 more books. So I thought, you know, 4 is a decent wrap-up, might as well. So yeah, I finished 4 books this month. The first one was The Science of Monsters by Matt Kaplan. The Origins of the Creatures We Love to Fear, and this was previously published as Medusa's Gaze and Vampire's Bite, so maybe you've heard it under that title. This was pretty good. I think I ended up giving it 4 stars on Goodreads. Might have been more like 3.5-ish. The first half I didn't love. I felt like the first half was a little boring. Maybe because it was talking about monsters that aren't really super relevant. I keep wanting to say relative. Monsters that aren't super relevant today, like things that the ancient Greeks and Romans feared, like Medusa and the Nemean lion. Is that how you pronounce that? I'm not sure. He kind of looks into different, you know, real factors that might have influenced the invention of these monsters in people's minds. Like, you know, finding dinosaur bones. Like, holy shit, what was this huge animal that existed at some point, you know, so then they make something up. And so parts of it were really interesting. Parts of it I felt were kind of obvious, and he just went on and on about things that were like, duh, move on. But that was in the first half. The second half I thought was really interesting, and I really enjoyed it. And it was more about vampires and ghosts and demons, you know, things that I think people still kind of somewhat fear today. At least they're still relevant today, because, you know, even if we don't really fear vampires anymore, there's still vampires everywhere. You know, there's TV shows and books and all kinds of stuff about vampires. But anyway, yeah, I found the second half to be really interesting. Talked about, in regard to demons and spirits, sleep paralysis, which is a subject that I find fascinating and terrifying. I've never experienced it, and I hope I never do, because it sounds awful. But it really made me want to read more about that, because I guess people often hallucinate the same thing when they're experiencing sleep paralysis, which he doesn't really explain why people hallucinate the same thing. And it's a person, like they hallucinate like a figure sitting on their chest, which is terrifying. But that's one of his explanations for why people might think that demons exist or ghosts. Yeah, I find that really fascinating, and it made me really want to read more about sleep paralysis. And also, I would have loved to read an entire book about, like, the history of vampires, too, because I found that really interesting. Another thing that I didn't like about this book was the footnotes. There's footnotes throughout it, and footnotes are just annoying in general, I think, but these were extra annoying because sometimes they were interesting information that I was like, oh, glad I read that. And sometimes it was some dumbass comment that he thought was funny that was just super annoying and didn't need to be there at all. So I hated the footnotes. Overall, I did really like the book, though. Like I said, there were some kind of boring parts, but all in all, I'm glad I read it. The next book I finished this month was One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest by Ken Kesey. Megan and I buddy read this with Cody from Pimp Book Reviews, and we're doing something with him involving this book that will hopefully be out pretty soon, so look forward to that. And I fucking loved this book. I thought it was awesome. It's about a man who is in a mental institution, and it's told from the perspective of one of the patients who's a chronic, and everyone thinks he's deaf, but he's not deaf. So he, you know, hears and sees everything going on here. So it was really brilliantly told from his perspective. And then this man comes into the mental institution and really shakes things up. And I thought that it was a really great look into, you know, the way mentally ill people were mistreated at this time. It was written in the 60s, I believe. Yeah, the 60s. And yeah, a lot of the stuff that happens in this book are things that actually you know, went on then, which is pretty horrifying. Also, it was great to learn about Nurse Ratched, because I've always heard people talk about, like, my boyfriend calls my friend Nurse Ratched because she's a nurse and he's just, you know, yanking her chain. But he calls her that, and I'd always heard people talk about Nurse Ratched before, but I never actually knew who that was or where she was from, because I had never seen this movie either. And so I'm reading it and I'm like, oh, that's who Nurse Ratched is. But yeah, overall this book was completely brilliant. I mean, it was just so well done. I was extremely impressed and I loved it. 5 stars. And then the next book that I finished this month was the book Liesl and Poe by Lauren Oliver. I hope that was the right name. I don't have my copy anymore because I gave it to my niece, and hopefully she will enjoy it. This is a middle grade novel about a little girl named Liesl, and at the beginning of the book her father has just died and she's been locked in the attic by her kind of evil stepmother. So there's, you know, already some kind of fairy tale-esque elements there. And then one night a ghost appears in her room, and this ghost is named Poe, and it is ambiguous to whether it's a boy or a girl. The ghost doesn't know, you can't tell. It's just kind of blurry things on the other side, as Poe calls it. Things become blurry and you can't really distinguish that anymore. So, and Poe also has a pet, which is maybe a cat, maybe a dog, you don't know, and his name is Bundle. But anyway, Poe and Liesl sort of become friends. And then, meanwhile, there's this apprentice, or there's this alchemist and his apprentice, who's a little boy named Will, and Will and Liesl's lives kind of become entwined. I don't want to, like, give everything away, but it's a really beautiful story. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I ended up giving it 5 stars on Goodreads. It may be more of like a 4.5 because there were a couple things that bothered me about it. One of the things was that Will knows who Liesl is before Liesl knows who he is, because Will likes to go watch Liesl through her window, which is creepy, a little stalker-esque, and I didn't really like that being in a children's book. Not that, I mean, you know, it was completely innocent. He's a kid. He wasn't, like, you know, doing anything unseemly there, you know. He just saw her and was intrigued by her and kind of wished that he were friends with her, and so he would see and, you know, wondered, I think, also, like, why is she in this attic and whatever. So it was more just like curiosity on his part, I think, but I don't know. It still bothered me a little bit. I was kind of, and he never tells her that he did that. Like, she never knows that, like, he knew who she was before she did. Before she knew who he was. So, wasn't really a fan of that thing. Also, another thing that kind of bothered me about it, which it's something that I think is common in a lot of children's books and is extremely common in fairy tales, and that's the whole, like, ugly people are bad and pretty people are good, or maybe it's more that bad people are ugly and good people are pretty kind of thing, because, and this wasn't true for all the characters in the book. Most of them, she didn't really describe them as ugly or pretty, but she specifically describes Liesl as pretty more than once, and she specifically describes Liesl's stepmother as ugly at least once. And I don't know, that just always bothers me a little bit in books, because I think it's, like, not good to sort of teach children that, like, ugly people are bad and pretty people are good, because that's not always the case. So, you know, that one wasn't really that big of a deal because it's just kind of a common, like I said, there were like fairy tale elements, so that might have just been an element that she was pulling from fairy tales. But yeah, those were just the two like things that kind of bothered me about the book. But overall, the story was absolutely beautiful, and there was moments of such great profundity that I was not expecting in a children's book at all. In fact, I wrote something down because I knew I was going to be giving this to my niece, so instead of just marking it, I wrote it down in my notebook. And it was this passage where she says, "This was the kind of world they lived in. When people were afraid, they did not always do what they knew to be right. They turned away. They closed their eyes. They said, 'Tomorrow, tomorrow perhaps I'll do something about it.' And they said that until the day that they died." Yeah, and I was just sort of, like floored by, you know, that being in a kid's book, because it is true, you know, people do that all the time. Oh, I'll do something about that tomorrow, and it never gets, you know, it never happens. And there was other passages too that just sort of, I read that and I was like, wow. For a children's book, wow. And I mean, I don't mean to say that children's books can't be profound or whatever, but it was just like much more than I was expecting, I would say. I also really loved how this book ended. I was a little afraid of how it was going to end because, you know, I was afraid it was going to be too happy. And it was a happy ending, but it was a realistic ending, if that makes sense for a book that involves ghosts and magic. But yeah, I really, really loved the ending. I also loved the character, oh shit, I can't remember his name now. I don't have the book anymore. The security guard, Mort? I don't remember. But there's a big security guard who has a cat, and he's like following Will, trying to track Will down because he wants to give him a hat, because he thinks his head's cold, he needs a hat. So I really liked that character, and in my head when I was reading his character, I heard him as the guy from Bob's Burgers, Teddy, the regular at the burger shop. That's what I heard him as, which was even more entertaining. Overall, really loved Liesl and Poe, and I definitely would recommend it. And then the last book that I finished this month is another middle grade novel, and that is Holes by Louis Satcher? I don't know. But this is a book that I somehow never read as a kid, and also, again, never saw the movie. So I was going into this not knowing shit about it, really. It's about a boy who ends up at this camp for like delinquents, even though he actually didn't do anything wrong. But he ends up at this Camp Green Lake for delinquent children, and he has to, what they do there is they make them dig holes. They have to dig a big hole every day in the bottom of this dried up lake. Yeah, as the book goes along, Stanley sort of figures out why they're digging these holes, and they're also like being mistreated, and you know, there's a big mystery to it. But I loved that book too. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. It was, yeah, like I was feeling the middle grade this month, I guess. But I really thoroughly enjoyed it. The mystery was really interesting. There were a couple things that were slightly predictable, but I think that if I had been reading it as a child, that it wouldn't have been to me. Because there was like certain things, there was like 1 or 2 things that I figured out that I was like, I feel like if I had been a kid, I wouldn't have known to put that together, you know? I don't know. Regardless, I still really, really enjoyed it. Yeah, just the way everything came together in the end was really fun and cool, and I don't really know what else to say about it. It was great. Read it if you haven't. Do it. Oh, also, I didn't mention that I buddy read it with Erica from The Perks of Books and Sam and Amber from The Drunken Library, so that was a lot of fun, especially since those three are all big fans of it already, and I think are fans of the movie as well. So it was fun for me to like see what they had to say about it, having been longtime fans of it and me being a newbie. And I hope that it was fun for them to see me being like, what's gonna happen next? Yeah, I think that's it. That's all I read this month. I'm partway through. Where did it go? I'm a mess right now. I'm still working on reading The Song of the Forest right now. If you watched my previous video, you heard me talk about this. And you also know that I'm going to be reading Consider the Lobster by David Foster Wallace next. I'm also still kind of slowly working through this collection of short stories. Alfred Hitchcock Presents Stories Not for the Nervous. I'm not even halfway through it yet. Actually, it's short stories, plus it's got 2 novelettes and 1 novel in here. So I think I'm up to one of the novelettes, perhaps. Actually, maybe I have 1 more short story. Anyway, I'm like still all over the place. I meant to read Fight Club last month too, and I didn't do it. Maybe I'll do it this month. Anyway, that's gonna be it for me. Stay tuned tomorrow for Megan's video. And thanks to everyone for watching and subscribing. And there'll be links below to Megan and I's social media. And I'll see you next time.